The day my father died, I wasn't standing beside his hospital bed. I wasn't holding his hand. I wasn't even told he was gone until almost 6 hours later. By then, my older brother had already made every phone call, arranged the funeral home, and somehow managed to convince everyone that I simply didn't care enough to show up. Yeah, that lie spread through our small Virginia town faster than the truth ever had. By sunset, people who had known me since childhood were looking at me with disappointment instead of sympathy. They believed I had abandoned my own father during his final hours. The painful part wasn't that strangers believed it. The painful part was that my own family had started the rumor. My name is Emma Carter. I'm 34 years old, and for the last 11 years I've worked as an emergency room nurse. My job taught me that life can change in seconds. It also taught me something even more difficult. Families often reveal who they really are after a funeral, not before it. Growing up, my father wasn't a wealthy man. He owned a small auto repair shop just outside town. He worked 6 days a week, came home smelling like motor oil, and somehow still found enough energy to help me with homework every evening. He always told me one thing: money should never become more important than your name. At the time, I thought he was giving ordinary fatherly advice. Years later, I'd realized he had been trying to prepare me for the very people who shared our last name. Everything changed after my mother passed away. My brother Daniel slowly took control of Dad's finances, claiming he was only trying to help. Since I worked long hospital shifts, I appreciated having someone close by to assist him. I never questioned the paperwork. I never questioned the bank statements. Most importantly, I never questioned my own brother. Then came the phone call that changed everything. I had just finished a 12-hour overnight shift when my phone started vibrating inside my locker. There were 5 missed calls from Daniel and 1 voicemail that lasted less than 10 seconds. Call me, Dad's gone. That was it. No explanation, no details, no chance to say goodbye. I drove to the house as fast as I could, but by the time I arrived, the funeral home had already taken him away. Relatives filled the living room. Some hugged me, others barely acknowledged I had entered. I noticed whispers almost immediately. Every conversation stopped whenever I walked past. At first, I assumed people were grieving. Later, I learned they were judging. The funeral itself felt like I was watching someone else's life. Daniel stood at the front greeting guests while people praised him for handling everything. More than once, I heard someone quietly ask why I hadn't been there for Dad's final moments. Every time the question came up, Daniel lowered his head and sighed without correcting them. He never directly lied. He simply allowed everyone else to finish the story for him. For weeks after the funeral, I tried convincing myself none of it mattered. My father was gone. Family arguments suddenly felt meaningless compared to that loss. Then one afternoon, Daniel called a meeting at Dad's house. "I think it's time we discuss the estate," he said. The words felt strangely rushed. Dad hadn't even been buried for a full month. When I arrived, the dining table was covered with folders, property documents, and coffee cups. Daniel smiled as though everything had already been decided. "The attorney's coming tomorrow," he announced, "and there's really not much to worry about." I looked at him. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "Dad updated his will before he passed." I wasn't surprised. Most people do. Then he added a sentence that made the entire room fall silent. He left almost everything to someone none of us expected. Nobody spoke. Even my aunt slowly lowered her coffee cup, and I felt my heartbeat quicken. "Who?" Daniel looked directly at me, like a woman named Grace Holloway. The name meant absolutely nothing to me. I'd never heard it before in my life. Neither had anyone else sitting around that table. For several long seconds, nobody moved. Then Daniel quietly smiled and said something that changed the direction of my entire life. I guess Dad had more secrets than we realized. The next morning, I met the estate attorney expecting answers. Instead, he slid a sealed envelope across the table. "My father instructed me to give this only to you," written across the front. In my father's handwriting were 5 words I would never forget. "Don't trust your brother, Emma." I stared at the envelope for several seconds before touching it. My father's handwriting was unmistakable. He had always written my name the same way, with the last letter slightly tilted upward. Suddenly, I wasn't sitting inside an attorney's office anymore. I was 10 years old again, watching him leave handwritten notes inside my lunchbox before school. The memories hit harder than I expected. My hands actually trembled as I broke the seal. The room became completely silent. Daniel leaned forward in his chair. "Again, what is it?" he asked. I ignored him. The attorney, Mr. Collins, simply nodded toward the letter. "Take your time." I unfolded the pages carefully. The first sentence stole the air from my lungs. Emma. If you're reading this, then I wasn't given the chance to tell you everything myself. I swallowed hard and continued reading. First, I need you to know something. I never stopped loving you. If anyone tells you I believed you abandoned me during my final days, don't believe them. I know exactly why you weren't there. My eyes froze on the page. I looked up at the attorney. What does he mean? Mr. Collins didn't answer. Instead, he quietly pointed toward the second page. I kept reading. 3 days before I died, I asked Daniel to call you because I wanted to see you. He promised me he would. You never came. And I knew immediately something wasn't right. You never would have ignored me. The room suddenly felt much smaller. I slowly turned my head toward my brother. His face had gone pale. He avoided looking at me. I continued reading. If you're angry while reading this, don't let anger make your decisions. Let the facts do that. Inside my desk is a black metal lockbox. The combination is your birthday. Everything you need is inside. That was the end of the letter. No dramatic goodbye, no emotional speech, just instructions. I folded the pages carefully and looked directly at Daniel. You never called me. His jaw tightened. I left you a voicemail. You called me after he died. You never called me while he was alive. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he shrugged. It wouldn't have changed anything. Those 6 words hit me harder than any confession ever could. It would have changed everything. The attorney finally spoke. Mr. Carter left very specific instructions regarding that letter. He also instructed me not to discuss the contents until you had read it. I turned toward him. Did my father know someone was hiding things from me? Mr. Collins chose his words carefully. Your father believed there were matters that required independent verification. What matters? I'm afraid that's what the lockbox is for. Daniel suddenly stood up. This is ridiculous. It's obvious Dad wasn't thinking clearly. Mr. Collins looked at him without changing his expression. Your father updated these instructions 6 months before his illness became critical. Daniel immediately sat back down. No one said another word. The meeting ended less than 10 minutes later, and as everyone walked toward the parking lot, I noticed something strange. My aunt avoided looking at me. My uncle whispered something to Daniel before quickly leaving. Even relatives who had greeted me warmly earlier now seemed uncomfortable. It was almost as if the letter had scared them, not because they knew what was inside, but because they realized my father had planned for something long before his death. I drove straight to Dad's house. Daniel had taken a different route after leaving the attorney's office, which meant I arrived first. For the first time since the funeral, the house was completely quiet. Every room still smelled faintly of motor oil and old coffee. His reading glasses rested exactly where he'd left them. His favorite jacket still hung beside the back door. For one brief moment, I forgot why I'd come. I simply stood there, missing him. Then I remembered the letter. His desk sat inside the small office connected to the garage. The black metal lockbox was exactly where he said it would be. Dust covered the top. Nobody had touched it. I slowly turned the combination dial, month, day, year, my birthday. The lock clicked open. Inside were several sealed envelopes, a flash drive, 2 bank folders, and a small leather notebook with one handwritten label. Read this first. My heartbeat became louder with every passing second. Whatever my father had hidden, he hadn't trusted anyone else to find it, not even his own son. As I reached for the notebook, I heard a car door slam outside. Someone had just pulled into Dad's driveway, and judging by the heavy footsteps racing toward the front door, whoever it was knew exactly what I had just found. The footsteps stopped just outside the front door. I quickly closed the lockbox, slid it beneath Dad's desk, and stood up. My heart was pounding so hard that I could hear it in the silence of the house. A second later, the front door opened without a knock. Daniel. He looked around the room before his eyes landed on me. I figured I'd find you here, he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I came to grab a few things. I folded my arms. So did I. For several seconds, neither of us spoke, then his eyes drifted toward the office. You've been in Dad's study? I have. What were you looking for? The same thing you're looking for. His smile disappeared. I don't know what you're talking about, I held his gaze. You followed me here. No. You left the attorney's office 10 minutes before everyone else. You somehow knew I'd come straight to the house. And the first place you looked, it was Dad's office. He didn't answer. That silence told me more than words ever could. Daniel walked slowly into the study and glanced around the room. You know, he said casually, Dad kept a lot of old junk in here. I was thinking about cleaning it out, eh? That's thoughtful. He looked back at me. You don't mind if I start today? I smiled politely. I do. For the first time that afternoon, his expression hardened. This house belongs to the estate. It does. And until probate is finished? Nothing leaves this property. His jaw tightened. You've been talking to Collins. I've been listening. Another long silence settled between us. Finally, Daniel laughed. You always did think you were the smartest person in the room. I remembered hearing those exact words years earlier, right before my family stopped believing me. I don't need to be the smartest. I just need the truth. He stared at me for another moment before turning toward the garage. If you find anything important, let me know. I'll think about it. Without another word, he walked out. I waited until his truck disappeared down the street before locking the front door. Then I returned to Dad's office. The lockbox was still beneath the desk, exactly where I'd hidden it. This time, I carried everything into the kitchen. If there was one lesson my profession had taught me, it was simple. Never rush through evidence. I opened the leather notebook first. Dad's handwriting covered every page. The first entries were ordinary. Doctor appointments, medication schedules, small reminders to himself. Then the tone changed. Daniel asked for another loan today. He promised he'd pay it back after selling the lake property. Still waiting. A few pages later. Bank balance doesn't look right. Need to compare statements. My breathing slowed. Dad had noticed something. Several more entries followed, short, precise, almost like an investigator keeping notes, and Daniel insists everything is under control. Numbers don't agree. Emma needs to see these if something happens to me. I slowly closed my eyes. He had known, not everything, but enough to realize something wasn't right. Beneath the notebook sat 2 bank folders. Inside were account statements covering almost 4 years. At first glance, everything looked normal. Then I noticed something familiar, large transfers, perfectly rounded amounts, always approved online, always occurring late at night, always moving into the same unfamiliar account. I grabbed my calculator. Old habits. Within 15 minutes, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Nearly $180,000 had quietly disappeared over 3 years. I checked the account number again. It wasn't Dad's. It wasn't mine. It wasn't connected to the repair shop. So who did it belong to? Before I could look any further, a folded receipt slipped out of the folder and landed on the floor. I picked it up. It wasn't a bank receipt. It was from a private storage facility 20 miles outside town in Unit 214, paid 6 months in advance. Customer name, Grace Holloway, the same woman who had supposedly inherited almost everything. For several seconds, I simply stared at the paper. Nothing made sense anymore. If Grace had been stealing money, why would Dad leave her anything? Unless she wasn't the villain everyone believed she was, maybe. She was the only person Dad trusted besides me. Suddenly, the entire story looked different. Daniel had spent weeks convincing everyone that Grace was some mysterious woman who manipulated our father, but the notebook, the bank records, and now this receipt, were all pointing somewhere else, towards someone who had been standing beside me since the funeral. I turned the receipt over, but expecting to find nothing. Instead, someone had written a single sentence in a blue ink. If you're reading this, go to Unit 214 before Daniel does. I didn't waste another second. I folded the receipt, slipped it inside my jacket pocket, grabbed the lockbox, and walked out of Dad's house. For the first time since his funeral, I felt like I wasn't chasing answers anymore. The answers were waiting for me. The storage facility sat nearly 20 miles outside town, tucked behind an old industrial park that most people drove past without noticing. It was quiet enough that I could hear gravel crunch beneath my tires as I pulled through the security gate. According to the receipt, Unit 214 was at the very back of the property. Before getting out, I looked around. No other vehicles, no employees, nothing but rows of identical metal doors stretching across the property. I unlocked the unit. The door rolled upward with a loud metallic rattle. I expected boxes, old furniture, maybe family photographs instead. The entire unit looked like a private office someone had packed away in a hurry. Metal filing cabinets lined one wall. Shelves were stacked with labeled storage bins. A folding table sat in the center of the room with a laptop, several binders, and a portable scanner covered beneath a plastic sheet. None of it looked abandoned. It looked organized, as though someone had expected to come back. I slowly walked inside. The first binder was labeled Repair Shop Financial Records. The second read Property Transactions. The third made my stomach tighten. Personal journal, G.H. Grace Holloway. I opened the journal. The first page was dated almost 5 years earlier. Robert doesn't trust Daniel anymore. I frowned. Robert. My father's name. The next page read, he asked me to help organize copies of every financial document. He says if anything happens to him before he can confront Daniel, someone has to know the truth. I stopped breathing for a moment. Grace wasn't hiding evidence. She was protecting it. Page after page described meetings with my father. She wasn't his secret girlfriend. She wasn't manipulating him. She was a retired forensic accountant who had met Dad through a small business fraud seminar nearly 6 years earlier. When Dad started noticing money disappearing from his accounts, Grace volunteered to help him quietly investigate before accusing anyone. Everything suddenly made sense. Dad hadn't trusted strangers. He hadn't even trusted family. He trusted someone who knew how financial fraud actually worked. I reached for another folder. Inside were printed bank transfers, copies of canceled checks, and handwritten notes connecting dozens of suspicious transactions. Every trail pointed toward one person and Daniel, but something else caught my attention. Several withdrawals had been approved using Dad's online banking credential, and while hospital records showed he had been admitted for surgery, he physically couldn't have authorized them. Someone else had. My phone suddenly vibrated. Rachel, I answered immediately. Emma, where are you? Why? Because Daniel's looking for you. My heartbeat quickened. How do you know? He came by the hospital asking if anyone had seen you. What did you tell him? The truth. That I hadn't. She hesitated. Emma. He looked terrified. Not angry, not confused. Terrified. That meant he knew exactly what I had found. I ended the call and looked around the storage unit again. Near the back wall sat one final locked cabinet. Unlike everything else, it required a key. I searched every drawer, nothing. Then I remembered the lockbox. Inside one small envelope was a single brass key with no label. My father had planned this. He knew I'd eventually come here. The key slid into the cabinet lock perfectly. The door clicked open. Inside sat only one thick envelope. Across the front, in my father's handwriting, were the words, "If Emma opens this, Daniel has already gone too far." My hands felt numb. I carefully opened the envelope. Instead of papers, a small digital voice recorder fell into my hand. There was only one audio file saved. The recording date was exactly 4 days before my father died. With my thumb hovering over the play button, I noticed something written on the back of the recorder. If you're hearing my voice, it means someone in this family betrayed me, and it wasn't the person everyone blamed. The voice recorder felt heavier than it should have. It was such a small device, yet somehow it carried the weight of my entire family. I took a slow breath and pressed play. For several seconds, nothing. Only the faint sound of someone adjusting the recorder. Then my father's voice filled the quiet storage unit. "We're recording?" A woman's voice answered. "Yes, Robert." Grace. She sounded exactly how I'd imagined. Calm, professional, focused. My father sighed heavily before speaking again. If Emma ever hears this, then I wasn't able to finish what I started. My eyes immediately filled with tears. Hearing his voice again after months felt like losing him all over again. I've spent the last 2 years pretending everything is fine because I wanted proof before I accused my own son. The words echoed through the room. I kept hoping I was wrong. I prayed I was wrong. But every document Grace uncovered points to the same person. A long silence followed. Then Dad continued, Daniel has been transferring money from my business accounts for years. He thinks I never noticed. I noticed. I simply needed enough evidence to prove it. I froze. The repair shop, the savings, the missing money, it had never been random. It had been systematic. Grace's voice came back onto the recording. Robert, are you sure you want Emma involved? he answered without hesitation. She's the only one who'll follow facts instead of emotions. I closed my eyes. Even now, he still believed in me. The recording continued. If something happens to me before I expose this, I need Emma to finish it. Not because I want Daniel punished, but because I don't want my daughter spending the rest of her life believing I chose someone else over her. A tear rolled down my cheek. That single sentence destroyed every lie Daniel had built. Dad never abandoned me. He was trying to protect me. The recording suddenly shifted. Papers moved across the table. Grace spoke again. There's one more thing. If Daniel realizes you've been collecting evidence, he may try to destroy it. Dad laughed quietly. That's why nothing important is staying at my house. I've already moved everything. My heartbeat quickened. Everything? What else had he hidden? Then came the sentence neither of them expected anyone else to hear. I also changed my will. Grace remained silent. Dad continued. I didn't leave my estate to you because I loved you. I left it to you because I trust you. I know you'll give Emma everything when the time is right. The recording stopped, just like that. No goodbye, no final words, only silence. I sat there staring at the recorder. 4 months. I had believed my father had replaced me. In reality, he had sacrificed his own reputation to make sure the evidence survived. Grace had never inherited the estate for herself. She had become its guardian. I suddenly understood why Daniel looked terrified after the attorney's office. If Grace followed Dad's instructions, Daniel would lose everything. I quickly searched the rest of the cabinet. Behind the recorder sat another sealed folder marked Property Transfer Instructions. Inside was a signed letter from my father authorizing Grace to transfer every remaining asset to me once specific legal conditions were met. One condition had already been checked. Robert Carter, deceased. The second condition made my blood run cold, as evidence of financial fraud must be secured before any transfer is completed. Dad knew. He knew Daniel would try something after his death. He planned for it months in advance before I could think any further. My phone rang again. Rachel, the moment I answered, she didn't even say hello. Emma, you need to leave. My stomach tightened. What happened? Daniel just reported the storage unit stolen. I looked around in disbelief. What? The sheriff's department is already on the way. My pulse exploded. Daniel wasn't trying to recover evidence. He was trying to get there. Before I could leave with it, I looked through the small window in the storage unit door in the distance. Red and blue lights turned into the driveway, but they weren't alone. Behind the sheriff's SUV was Daniel's black pickup, and judging by the smile on his face, he believed he had already won. The flashing red and blue lights reflected across the storage unit doors as 2 sheriff's deputies stepped out of their SUV. Daniel parked directly behind them, climbed out of his truck, and crossed his arms with the confidence of someone who believed the next 5 minutes would erase every problem he had. I quietly slipped the voice recorder into my jacket pocket. The leather notebook followed. Everything else stayed exactly where it was. If there was one thing my father had taught me, it was never to panic when the facts were already on your side. One of the deputies approached first. Ma'am, are you Emma Carter? I am. We received a report that someone may have entered this storage unit without authorization. Before I could answer, Daniel stepped forward. I told you she'd be here. He pointed directly at me. She's trying to steal evidence that doesn't belong to her. I looked at him without saying a word. The deputy turned toward me. Do you have authorization to access this unit? Instead of answering immediately, I reached into my purse and handed him the folded receipt I'd found inside Dad's records. He examined it carefully, then looked at the rental agreement attached to it. The name matched Grace Holloway. The deputy frowned. Do you know Ms. Holloway? I don't. But I know the man who paid for this unit. Daniel laughed. She doesn't know what she's talking about. The deputy ignored him. I slowly removed my father's handwritten letter from my folder. This letter instructed me to come here. I was also given the key that opened the locked cabinet. The deputy compared the key with the cabinet behind me. It matched perfectly. Daniel's smile began to disappear. This is ridiculous, he snapped. My father never would have trusted her with anything. I finally looked directly at him. No, he trusted someone else. The silence that followed seemed to last forever. The deputy spoke again. Until ownership is verified, nobody removes anything from this unit. Daniel immediately objected. But she's already touched everything. I said, nobody? His voice became noticeably firmer. For the first time all afternoon, Daniel looked nervous. The deputies photographed the contents of the storage unit before sealing the entrance with temporary evidence tape until ownership documents could be confirmed. As everyone walked back toward the parking lot, Daniel moved beside me. His voice dropped so low only I could hear him. "You should have stayed out of this." I didn't even slow my pace. "I tried. You forced me back in." He grabbed my arm, not hard enough to hurt me, just enough to stop me walking. The deputy noticed immediately. "Sir." Daniel released me at once. "I'm sorry. I just wanted to talk." The deputy remained watching him until we reached our vehicles. As I climbed into my car, Rachel called again. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine." "What happened?" I explained everything. When I finished, she remained silent for several seconds, then she asked the question nobody else had thought to ask. "Emma, if your father trusted Grace that much, where is she now?" The question hit me like a lightning strike. Grace. Since reading the will, since finding the storage unit, since hearing Dad's recording, I hadn't actually spoken to the woman who held every remaining answer. I immediately called Mr. Collins. He answered after the second ring. "Mr. Collins, I need Grace Holloway's phone number." His voice became unusually quiet. "I'm afraid I can't give you that." "Why not?" "Because she's been trying to contact you for almost 3 weeks. My heart skipped. "What?" "I mailed 3 letters. I left 2 voicemails. I even sent someone to your apartment. I never received anything." "I know." He paused. "That's because every single letter was returned unopened." A cold feeling settled in my stomach. I checked my mailbox almost every day. No letters had ever arrived. Only one person besides me had access to the mailbox while I worked 12-hour shifts. Daniel. The realization hit all at once. The missed letters, the delayed voicemail, Dad's final phone call, the funeral. Everything followed the exact same pattern. He hadn't just stolen money. He'd been controlling information, making sure I only learned what he wanted me to know. Mr. Collins spoke again. "I finally located Grace yesterday. She asked me to tell you one thing." I gripped the steering wheel tighter. "What did she say?" He took a slow breath. "She said, 'Tell Emma I'm no longer safe.'" For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. Then Daniel wasn't trying to protect himself anymore. He was trying to silence the only witness who could prove everything. That evening, an unknown number appeared on my phone. I almost ignored it. Then a text message arrived. Only 6 words. "I know where Grace is. Come alone." The message stayed on my screen for almost a full minute. "I know where Grace is. Come alone." No name, no phone number, just 6 words. I read them again, then again. Every instinct I'd developed as an emergency room nurse told me it was a trap. But another part of me, the daughter who had spent weeks searching for answers, knew I couldn't ignore it. I typed one reply. "Who is this?" The response came almost immediately. "Someone your father trusted." Nothing else, no explanation, no location. Exactly 30 seconds later, another message appeared. "Riverside Marina. Boat dock 6, 30 minutes. I looked at the dashboard clock. 5:42 p.m.? Sunset would be in less than an hour. I immediately called Rachel. She answered before the first ring finished. "Please tell me you're not actually thinking about going." "I have to." "You don't." "I do." I explained the messages. The silence on the other end lasted several seconds. Finally, she sighed. "Then promise me one thing." "What?" "If anything feels wrong, you leave. No questions. I promise." I ended the call, started the engine, and drove toward Riverside Marina. The entire drive felt strangely quiet. My father's voice kept replaying inside my head. "Let the facts make your decisions." Facts, not fear, not anger, facts. When I arrived, the marina was almost empty. Only a handful of boats remained tied to the docks. The evening wind carried the smell of the river as I slowly walked toward Dock 6. No one. I checked my phone. Exactly 6:11 p.m. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around. An older man wearing a faded navy jacket stood a few feet away. Gray beard, baseball cap, nervous eyes. "Emma." I didn't answer immediately. "Who are you?" "My name is Frank Lawson. I worked with your father." I've never heard of you. I know. Robert wanted it that way. He reached into his jacket very slowly. Every muscle in my body tightened. Instead of a weapon, he pulled out an old photograph. It showed my father standing beside Grace, and the man now standing in front of me. All three were smiling. The photo had been taken inside Dad's repair shop nearly 2 years earlier. I wasn't supposed to contact you unless something happened to Grace. My heartbeat quickened. What happened to her? Frank looked around before lowering his voice. Someone broke into her house 3 nights ago. My stomach dropped. Was she hurt? No, but she disappeared before they found her. Who broke in? He looked directly into my eyes. What? We don't know. But your father believed that if anyone ever came looking for Grace, but it would be because they were desperate. I slowly folded my arms. Desperate for what? Frank hesitated. Everything your father collected. The documents, the recordings, the financial trail. He spent years putting it together. I swallowed hard. So Grace has all of it? Frank shook his head. No. She only has part of it. The rest? Your father hid somewhere no one would think to look. Before I could ask another question, a loud engine echoed across the parking lot. Both of us turned. A black SUV had just pulled in, its headlights switched off. 3 men stepped out. None of them looked familiar. Frank's expression changed instantly. We have to leave. Who are they? I don't know. But they're not here to rent a boat. The men began walking toward the docks, slowly, confidently. One of them pointed in our direction. Frank grabbed my wrist. Emma! Run! Without thinking, we sprinted down the wooden dock as heavy footsteps exploded behind us. Someone shouted. Another voice yelled, Stop them! The dock shook beneath our feet. Boats rocked against the water. I looked back once. The 3 men were closing the distance far faster than I expected. Then, one of them reached inside his jacket and pulled out a handgun. The gun wasn't pointed at me, it was pointed at Frank. And the terrified look on his face told me something before he ever spoke. He knew exactly who those men worked for. The sound of footsteps echoed across the wooden dock as Frank pulled me toward the last boat tied to the far end. My heart pounded so hard I could barely hear the men shouting behind us. Hurry! Frank yelled. The boat wasn't large. It was an old fishing vessel with faded blue paint and a small outboard motor. Frank untied the rope with shaking hands while I looked back. The 3 men were less than 50 feet away. One of them raised the handgun again. A deafening crack split the evening air. The bullet slammed into the wooden railing beside me, sending splinters flying across my face. I instinctively ducked. Frank shoved me toward the boat. Get in! I climbed aboard just as he started the engine. For one terrifying second, nothing happened. The engine coughed, then died. The men were almost at the end of the dock. Frank tried again. The motor sputtered. Then finally roared to life. He pushed the throttle forward and the boat lurched away from the dock just as another gunshot echoed behind us. Water sprayed across the sides while the marina slowly disappeared into the darkness. Neither of us spoke for nearly 2 minutes. We simply listened. No boats followed us, no more gunshots, only the sound of the river beneath us. Finally, Frank slowed the boat near an abandoned boathouse hidden beneath an old railroad bridge. We're safe here. I wasn't convinced. Who were those men? Frank didn't answer immediately. Instead, he removed his cap and rubbed both hands across his face. Robert always hoped we'd never reach this point. What point? The point where people stop stealing money and start trying to erase witnesses. A chill ran through my body. Daniel hired them? I don't know. But I know this. They weren't looking for documents. They were looking for us. Frank reached into a waterproof storage compartment beneath the driver's seat and pulled out a thick manila envelope sealed with red tape. My father's handwriting covered the front. Final backup. My pulse quickened. What is that? The last copy. Copy of what? Everything. Frank carefully opened the envelope. Inside were dozens of printed bank transfers, business contracts, email records, and photographs. But one document immediately caught my attention. A corporate registration certificate. The company name read, Carter Property Holdings, LLC owner Daniel Carter, formation date 7 years earlier. I frowned. My father never mentioned this company. He couldn't, Frank replied quietly, because he never created it. What? Daniel forged Robert's signature. I stared at him. That's impossible. So Robert thought too. Frank handed me another document, a forensic handwriting report. My father's signatures on several business filings had been declared fraudulent. Every forged signature had one thing in common. Each one transferred another piece of my father's property into Daniel's control. The repair shop, the lake cabin, the equipment loans, even the insurance policies. My breathing became uneven. This wasn't theft, Frank nodded, and no. It was a long-term takeover. Years. Daniel hadn't suddenly become greedy after Dad got sick. He had been quietly rebuilding ownership of everything for years without anyone noticing. Then Frank pulled out one final photograph. This one wasn't financial. It showed Daniel standing outside a downtown office building beside a man wearing an expensive gray suit. "Who's that?" Frank looked at the picture for several seconds. "His attorney?" Frank slowly shook his head. "Worse. That's Victor Hale, the man who designed the entire plan." "The accountant?" "No. The financial fraud investigator." I looked up in disbelief. "He investigates fraud." "He used to." Frank's voice dropped almost to a whisper, until he realized committing fraud paid much better. Before I could process what I just heard, a phone began vibrating inside the envelope. Neither of us had noticed it before. It wasn't my phone. It wasn't Frank's. It was an old prepaid cell phone wrapped inside the documents. The screen lit up, one incoming message, no sender, only 7 words. "You found the backup? Now find Grace." Before I could unlock the phone, it rang. Unknown number. Frank looked at the screen, and every bit of color disappeared from his face. He whispered only one sentence. "Emma. Only one person knows this number. And if he's calling to... yeah, he already knows exactly where we are." The phone continued ringing. Neither of us moved. Frank stared at the screen as though he'd seen a ghost. "Answer it," I whispered. He slowly shook his head. "No." "Why?" "Because if it's who I think it is, he'll know we're together." The ringing stopped. For a moment. Only silence filled the old boathouse. Then another message appeared. "Nice try. I can already see your boat." Every muscle in my body froze. I rushed to one of the dusty windows and carefully pulled the curtain aside. My stomach dropped. Across the river, parked on the opposite shoreline, sat the same black SUV from the marina. Its headlights were off, but someone was standing beside it, watching the water through a pair of binoculars. "They found us," I whispered. Frank didn't even look. I told you they would. He grabbed the envelope, the prepaid phone, and Dad's files, stuffing everything into a waterproof backpack. "We're leaving." "Where?" "Somewhere Robert believed nobody would ever search." We slipped out through the back of the boathouse and followed a narrow trail leading into the woods. Branches scraped against my jacket as we walked deeper into the trees. After nearly 20 minutes, we reached an abandoned railroad maintenance shed. It looked forgotten. Rust covered the doors. Broken windows lined the walls. Frank smiled for the first time all evening. "This place saved your father's life once." I looked at him. "What do you mean?" "He discovered Daniel's fraud here." Frank pushed open the heavy metal door. Inside, hidden beneath a torn canvas tarp, sat an old steel safe. The combination lock had already been turned. Dad had left it ready. Frank slowly opened the safe. Inside were only 3 items, a thick blue folder, a small external hard drive, and a sealed envelope addressed to me. My name was written in Dad's handwriting, not Emma Carter, just one word. Pumpkin. The nickname he hadn't called me since I was 16. I couldn't stop the tears. I carefully opened the envelope. Inside was another handwritten letter. "If you've reached this place, then Daniel has become more dangerous than I ever wanted to believe. Don't hate him, Emma. Hate makes people careless. Facts make them accountable." I kept reading. "Everything you need is on the hard drive. Every bank transfer thing. Also till was sitting. Every forged document. Yeah. Every security video. Every recorded conversation. Grace helped me collect it all, and if anything happens to either of us, take this directly to Special Agent Michael Reeves." There was a business card clipped to the final page. FBI, Financial Crimes Division. I stared at the card. Dad hadn't planned to expose Daniel through family. He'd planned to expose him through federal investigators. This had never been a family disagreement. It had been a criminal investigation. Frank connected the hard drive to an old laptop stored inside the safe. Hundreds of folders appeared, videos, audio recordings, tax records, bank statements, business filings. Everything was organized exactly the way Dad used to organize the repair shop. Then one folder caught my attention. Home security! October 14th. Frank clicked it. The video began playing. The timestamp showed 4 days before Dad died. The front porch camera captured Daniel arriving just after sunset. He wasn't alone. Victor Hale stepped out of the passenger seat, the same man from the photograph. They entered the house together. 43 minutes later, Victor walked out carrying a black briefcase. Daniel followed. Then he stopped. He looked directly toward the security camera, almost as if he knew it was recording. He smiled, then calmly reached up and disconnected the camera. The screen went black. Neither of us spoke, because we both realized the same thing. Daniel hadn't just stolen money. He'd spent years believing he was smarter than everyone else. He never imagined my father had already copied every recording before the cameras went dark. Before I could close the laptop, another video file automatically opened. Its title made my heart stop. Hospital room, background, Antoa Ungetien, foreground, final conversation. I pressed play. The first face to appear wasn't my father's, it was Daniel's, and the very first sentence he spoke changed everything I thought I knew. Dad, Emma will never find out what really happened. My finger hovered over the trackpad for only a second before I clicked the final video. The hospital room appeared on the screen. The timestamp showed it had been recorded just 4 days before my father died. Dad looked weaker than I'd ever seen him. Machines beeped quietly beside his bed. Then the door opened. Daniel walked inside. He smiled, not the smile people wear when visiting a sick parent. It was calm, confident, almost relieved. He closed the door behind him and pulled a chair next to Dad's bed. For nearly 10 seconds, neither of them spoke. Finally, Dad broke the silence. I know. Daniel's smile faded. Yeah. You know what? I know about the accounts. The forged signatures. The properties. The loans. I know all of it. Daniel looked away before quietly laughing. I wondered how long it'd take. Dad didn't raise his voice. He simply asked, "Why?" Daniel leaned back in the chair. "Because you never trusted me. You trusted Emma. You trusted strangers. You trusted everyone except your own son." Dad slowly shook his head. "No, I trusted the person who never lied to me." Those words hit Daniel harder than anything else. His expression changed instantly. "You always thought she was perfect. She worked hard. She followed rules. She made you proud. And me? I was never enough." Dad looked directly into his eyes. "You were always enough. You just stopped believing honesty was." Daniel stood up. His breathing became heavier. "You should have given me the business." "I earned it." "You earned the opportunity," Dad answered. "No, not the ownership." Daniel took one step closer to the hospital bed. "You've already changed the will, haven't you?" Dad remained silent. Daniel smiled again. "I knew it, but it won't matter. No one will ever believe Emma. They already think she's the problem. And by the time anyone starts asking questions, everything will already belong to me." Dad didn't argue. He simply looked toward the hidden camera. A camera Daniel never noticed. Then Dad quietly said something that made my entire body freeze. "They'll believe facts." Daniel laughed. "Facts? What facts? The ones you think don't exist?" Dad smiled for the first time during the entire recording. "They've existed." Longer than you know." Daniel suddenly realized something. His confidence disappeared. "You recorded me?" The screen went black. The video ended. Neither Frank nor I spoke. There was nothing left to say. Dad had done exactly what he'd promised. He had let the facts speak. The following morning, Frank and I drove directly to the nearest FBI field office. Special Agent Michael Reeves was already expecting us. The moment he saw my father's letter, everything changed. Within hours, forensic accountants began reviewing the hard drive. Every transfer matched, every forged signature matched, every recording matched. The evidence wasn't just convincing, it was overwhelming. 3 days later, federal agents executed search warrants at Daniel's office, his home, and Victor Hale's consulting firm. News spread across town faster than any rumor ever had. Boxes of financial records were carried out on live television, computers, contracts, bank files, everything. People who had avoided me for years suddenly wanted to talk. Neighbors smiled again. Old clients called my office asking if I was accepting new appointments. Relatives who never defended me began saying they had always believed I was innocent. I thanked them politely, But I never corrected their rewritten memories because I'd finally learned something my grandmother tried to teach me years ago. People don't always remember the truth. They remember whichever version allows them to live comfortably. Several weeks later, Grace finally contacted me. She had been staying under federal protection until the investigation was secure. We met inside a quiet little cafe just outside Richmond. She wasn't mysterious. She wasn't manipulative. She wasn't the woman my family had imagined. She was exactly what my father said she was, a woman who refused to let innocent people carry someone else's guilt. She slid one final envelope across the table. I promised your father I'd only give you this when everything was over. Inside was a handwritten note, only one sentence. Your name was never the inheritance, Pumpkin. Your integrity was. I cried harder reading those words than I had at Dad's funeral, because for the first time, I understood what he had spent years protecting, not the business, not the house, not the money. Me. 6 months later, the repair shop reopened under its original name, not because I wanted to erase the past, but because I wanted people to remember what honesty looked like. Rachel handled the front office on weekends. Frank finally retired after helping investigators finish the case. Grace became one of my closest friends. As for Daniel, he accepted a plea agreement after every piece of evidence was verified. The man who spent years controlling everyone else's story lost control of his own. Sometimes people ask me if I ever forgave him. The answer surprises them. I did, not because he deserved it, but because I deserved to stop carrying the weight of someone else's choices. Forgiveness didn't erase what happened. It simply meant his lies no longer had permission to live inside me. Every Thanksgiving now, I unlock the repair shop for 1 hour before going home. I make a cup of coffee exactly the way Dad liked it. I sit in his old office, and before leaving, I read the last note he ever wrote to me. Not because I need proof anymore, but because it reminds me of something far more valuable than money. The truth doesn't always arrive first, but if you protect it long enough, it always finds its way home. If this story touched your heart, remember one thing. Sometimes the people who lose everything aren't the ones who made the biggest mistakes. They're simply the ones who refuse to tell the biggest lies. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me, what would you have done if you were Emma? Would you have forgiven Daniel and walked away forever? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.